welcome everybody to the deck tech for what I'll be playing in the Versus video this week. It is a green-black tokens deck that made the top 64 of the Open in Baltimore a little while ago. It is, you may recognize it as the Cryptolith Right deck that was sort of floating around before Baltimore as it got leaked on Reddit and went around online. And this looks a lot like that original list with a couple small changes. And before I get into those, I just want to note how go over a bit how the deck works. It uses a lot of the sort of free bodies that you get from things like Catacomb Sifter, and Scion Summoner, Visionary, and all these cheap creatures to flood the board. And then you can go sort of one of three different ways. You can either be an aggro deck and play Nissa, pump your team of 1/1s and 2/2s, and get aggressive that way. You can play this really grindy long game against removal spells with Evolutionary Leap, and not to mention your Visionaries, Blister Pods, Hangerbacks, Sifters are all good against removal as well. Or you can be really fun and play a ramp deck.
Really fun.
Yeah, Cryptolith Right's definitely the most fun part.
Just enabled my fun plan.
Yeah. The fun plan is playing Cryptolith Right, a new card from Shadows over Innistrad that turns all your creatures into Birds of Paradise, so they can tap for mana of any color. And so then all your cheap creatures just tap for extra mana, and you can start doing some really broken stuff, like cast Ulamog on turn 5, cast Ulvenwald Hydra, tutor up maybe a Westvale Abbey, and then sack creatures to Westvale Abbey, and then make an Ormondal. And then Sidisi here is the new addition to the deck and plays well with all these different plans, because it lets you sacrifice one of your things, especially a Hangerback Walker, and go find whichever piece you need for whatever plan you want to execute in that game. So say your opponent's particularly vulnerable to Nissa, but is good against Cryptolith Right, you can go find your Nissa, make sure you have the right cards for whatever game plan you're trying to handle at the time.
But would you ever do that when you could choose to have fun instead? You could just enable your fun plan every time.
Maybe your opponent has Dromoka's Command in hand.
You can still have some fun.
You can have a little bit of fun.
You can play rights and then float a bunch of mana. They kill it, then you have some fun. I'm just never letting that go.
It's the most fun plan. I don't know why. I don't know why you can't.
I don't know why it's so funny to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Michael is delirious.
Yeah, just weird mood today, I guess.
Yeah. So the cool thing about this deck is that even though at in any individual plan. So if you get aggressive, you're a worse aggro deck than something like White Humans. You're a worse long game controlling deck than something like White Black, and you're a worse ramp deck than Red Green Eldrazi ramp.
That's certainly not clear.
Okay, maybe you're just as good because you're casting Ulamog ahead of schedule, but
you're probably as good.
Even though you're worse at any individual plan than something else that exists, because you have the option for all three, it's very difficult for your opponent to stop you, because you can just shift plans if they focus too hard on one angle. And it's really hard if your opponent is caught unprepared for them to deal with an Ormondal or an Ulamog or an Ulvenwald Hydra. All these cards end the game really quickly, as does Nissa once your board gets out of control.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should even stress more about how this is kind of just like an Abbey deck, too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is very much an Abbey deck. That's sort of I almost think that the threat of the flipping Abbey is going to do more than flipping it.
I agree.
So it's another card you can tutor with Hydra, and they just can't really tap out to aggressively handle a big creature or apply pressure to you, because you just untap, Ormondal them, and they're almost dead.
Right.
You've probably gotten in some incidental damage, so they're below 18. So one attack puts them lethal, so they need to deal with it immediately. And so Westvale Abbey is going to be this card that sort of it sits there the entire game, and your opponent constantly has to play awkwardly to make sure they don't lose to it, and then they just end up losing to everything else. And sometimes you're just going to be okay, hope you don't have it, Ormondal you, and it wins the game by itself.
It's also nice in this incidental beatdown deck where you can, like Ross said, the threat of it is so high, you could just attack with your idiots. You have 5 random 1/1s just dealing damage, and eventually your opponent has to do something about them. And when they cast their sweeper or cast their removal spells or whatever, you can just transfer those creatures into the Ormondal. So that's certainly a powerful aspect of this deck.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really cool deck. How all these little pieces come together. It does a lot of different things, and it's something that I've wanted to get on a Versus video for a couple of weeks since we saw it during spoiler season. And this is a list that did well at the Open. It looks really good to me. I like the addition of Sidisi. The one Shaman, one is sort of a strange number, but like you fit what you can fit when all the space is pretty tight. But I think Shaman helps a lot. I'm hoping I get to use Shaman's formidable ability.
I guess you
You
could.
can definitely get up to 11 mana and usually have a bunch of creatures in play.
It certainly helps casting Sidisi. Sidisi is probably pretty difficult to cast when they have 10 black sources. Obviously, like Rights and Loam Dryad help out with that. But,
Yeah.
excuse me.
I think Rights is really nice as a mana fixer in this deck because it lets you not play any of just the enters the battlefield tap dual lands.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have Hissing Quagmire and Llanowar Waste, so only the good ones. And even though we're a low land count deck, it's only 22 lands, and 5 of them are colorless lands with the Abbeys and the one Sanctum. So and even though you only have 10 black sources, like you effectively have 18.
Right.
And Crippleth Right is sort of double black by itself, so it even functions a bit more like more than 18.
Sure.
And that's plenty to cast your 2 CDCs. I think Right also lets you just generate a ton of mana to effectively use your evolutionary leaps. Like all your creatures just untapped by themselves can tap for mana, sack themselves to a leap, so that they sort of naturally protect themselves from removal.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on in this deck, and certainly even more so a couple weeks ago when things were a little less, defined, and we were kind of still in awe of all the new cards. I certainly thought that this conceptually had the highest ceiling. Like, this deck could theoretically be broken, and I think, not to say that we have the best version or this is the best version or anybody's figured it out, but I think if there is going to be a deck at the Pro Tour that is just absolutely obscene and demolishes the tournament, it's probably something with Cryptolith Rights.
Yeah, the Right, it's a super powerful card, and the fact that you can almost seamlessly tie together these disparate plans to have a deck that is so well-rounded as to not really have a lot of weaknesses is really impressive. I'm just excited to play with it, although
this deck's super
I'm also
cool.
kind of nervous because I know it's going to be really difficult. It's like very technically intricate deck, so bear with me as I wade through some tough plays.
Yeah, these creature combo decks are always traditionally pretty difficult because you kind of have to weigh getting aggressive versus, doing your big thing, or, just figuring out how to sequence the stuff is very difficult.
Yeah,
but
when you're a linear deck, you know what you're about. You just do that thing, and you hope to do it well, and the optimization problem is pretty easy. Whereas very non-linear decks like this, you have to not only be able to execute 3 different plans and know the mechanics of them, you have to then examine the texture of the game and know the matchups to the point where you can figure out what the best plan to be on is.
Yep.
So that about does it for the main deck. Join us in a few minutes for the sideboard. Welcome back here for the sideboard of green-black tokens. This top row here is our smattering of removal spells when we need to do a little interacting. Just sort of the best options for a deck that is so heavy green you don't have a lot of actual removal spells you can cast.
Right.
So Self-Inflicted Wound and Ultimate Price are just the most efficient, particularly good against...
Siege Rhino, Anaphens of the Foremost,
Mantis Rider. Yeah,
it's just a great card.
Yeah, just get to kill all of them. But that you can kill some of the humans dex creatures. You can kill Avacyn with Ultimate Price. That's important. But just getting a little removal in the deck when you need to interact in the post-board games is important. Languish is a card that seems out of place to me.
I'm a little skeptical of this one.
I'm skeptical as well. I guess like maybe you get run over by aggressive decks, or I don't know. You can sort of slow play your hand, but in a deck filled with...
For the masochists out there,
Yeah,
got a little Languish action.
Definitely going to catch people by surprise with your sweepers.
Oh, yeah.
But cool with Hangerback
Let's
Walker.
have my other creature, my Loam Dryad, so I can Languish.
Yeah, that's the card I'm most skeptical of, but it certainly serves a purpose. I guess if you want to play like the long, grindy game against someone, having a sweeper against an aggressive deck is nice. Natural State, I think, is particularly important against Virulent Plague. You need to going to be a common sideboard card in the format. We already saw a lot of it in Baltimore, and so being able to blow up the Virulent Plague so all your tokens live, and you can actually sort of function without getting your Thopters and your Eldrazi Scions. This deck's going to have a hard time going with basically any of the plans. They all involve
definitely.
developing a pretty wide board.
Your creatures become very anemic when they're just 2/3s and 2/2s and 1/1s that don't generate any value.
Can also blow up Always Watching and the white removal enchantment, so it has some value there, but I think Virulent Plague is the really big target for this one. Transgress, nice against control decks when you need to take their sweeper, when they have Languishes or Descend of the Sinful?
Descend upon the Sinful? Is that right?
Sure.
4 white, exile all creatures. If you have Delirium, make a 4/4 angel.
Yeah, that or the Planar Outburst. If sweepers are ever popular, I think Transgress is important, and against opposing ramp decks.
Teams up with this card nicely, too.
Yeah, Thought Knot gives us another way to disrupt our opponent while applying pressure, which is important against both control and ramp. And we have 9 colorless sources as well as 6 cards that make Eldrazi Scion. So 15 ways to make a colorless mana for Thought Knot. Means this is a almost free kind of splash card to get in our sideboard. Provides a really nice effect. Having a card that can be a big threat by itself in this deck, I think, is an important thing to have post board. Only has the 2 Hydras, and like Sidisi can be a bit of a threat.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Ulamog is big, but you sort of need to develop a wide board to cast it. So I think having that in combination with Transgress gives you a nice post board plan against ramp and control decks. And then these 2 cards in the third row, the second Shaman and the third Hydra, I think are nice in matchups where you're not going to be interacting much. And so you just want to ramp, you want to move in harder on the ramp plan. And that means like you can play a turn 3 Shaman. If they don't have a lot of removal, it's probably going to live. Untap, play your Hydra on turn 4. And from there, like, that finds a Westvale Abbey, so you can unload your hand and make an Ormondal, or it finds a Sanctum, so that if you're going to ramp to 10 pretty quickly, so that you can play Ulamog, sack Sanctum, get second Ulamog, and exile 4 of their permanents over the course of 2 turns, and that should put away the game pretty quickly. So Shaman, just a really nice explosive card that I'm sure they wanted access to in greater numbers in certain matchups, so it makes sense to have one here.
Yeah, I like that element of the sideboard a lot. Whenever you have to just have like Goldfish and be very fast, even the 2/3 body is probably going to be able to block the turn it enters the battlefield against like the white weenie decks and stuff like that. And then you can curve that into a Hydra, and then you can either move all in on the Abbey or go even bigger with Ulamog. I like that aspect of the sideboard plan a lot.
Sideboarding in decks like this that have a bunch of different plans are all about figuring out which plans are most important in the matchup and then accentuating those while moving away from the others.
Yep.
And so we have ways to be a bit more controlling and play these long attrition games. We're going to need some removal then. We have ways to just not interact with our opponent and go big as quickly as possible. And we have ways to be more aggressive and get a little disruption in our deck so that we can just get ahead, stay ahead, and end a game pretty quickly that way. So it seems like a very well-rounded sideboard, and I'm excited to play some games.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.